Good evening, class. I thought I would not really get too involved with week 6. I know some of y'all are preparing for week 5 as it relates to wrapping up the short fiction units, getting ready to finalize your fiction exam, which for the most part, I mean, for the 2 students that I've already graded, the grades have been decent. Uh, Obviously, I still have many more exams left to grade as it gets closer to Sunday and after Sunday. As I said in the email, I still have about 8 fiction essays. And for the most part, I'm very pleased with the overall production of those close readings. The close readings can be kind of a challenge, especially if you're not used to doing close readings. You don't get a lot of close readings in 1101, which is sort of unfortunate. But if you had any type of high school English, which most everybody in this course has to have at least 3 to 4 years of high school English before they can graduate and get into college. So at some point between freshman and senior year of high school, you should have, closely read a passage, whether it was a poem, whether it was a short story like we did for this particular exercise, a novel, a passage or a couple pages out of a novel, or a play, or a movie. Anytime that you really dig down deep into a particular piece of literature or writing and you analyze it, you critically think about it, you're doing a close reading, whether you realize it or not. So I'm hoping the other 8 papers that I have left to grade, the grades will be well. Keep in mind, this is basically, we're going into week 6. So we have the remaining weeks of September, which is really not much. It's basically next week. And then we have the 4 weeks in October. We have about 3 weeks in November because we have about a week off, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as it gets closer to Thanksgiving break. And then we have about a week. I wouldn't even say really a week and a half, a week and about 2 days in December. So if you look at it, we have 4, 7, 4, 3, 8. We have probably about 9.5 weeks left, really, from today. So a lot of things can happen in those 9.5 weeks as it relates to clearly your grade. There's still time, especially if you're C or higher as your average, to pull that grade up. The flip side of that is, being that we have about nearly 10 weeks, there's still time, and I hope this is not the case for anybody, that the grade will decrease. That's always, it's bad when the grade starts to, decrease at this point. So I'm hoping the grades start to increase, because as we move along week 6, week 7, week 8, so on and so forth, what you're going to see, sort of the trend in your grade is that your grade is not going to stay constant. So your 85, if you got 85, I'm just using that as an example, won't remain in 85 here at the end. It's either it's going to continue to go up or it's going to continue to go down. Now, that B range, let's just say it being a B range, an 85 is a strong B. It's right in the middle of that range. Now, your B can range to a high B or to a low B. It can obviously go to a low A, middle A, high C, low C, middle C, and so on and so forth. So just because, the numerical value won't remain constant doesn't mean the actual range of your grade, because again, an 80 to an 89 is a B. So your range or your level of that particular, as it relates to that particular grade, could go up and down. It all really depends on your work ethic and your ability to provide good work during the next 10 weeks. Uh, like I said in the email earlier, I do have several folks that do have a 11% or a 12% or a 47% or a 0, going into 6 weeks. And I mean, if your grade is sort of that low, I would say, if you got a 46, 47, you still have a chance to pull it up. It's right there in the middle, sort of, a couple 10, couple 15 points will pull you up to a D. But again, really, I mean, when you think about it, most programs of study, depending on your major or depending on whether you're going to transfer to another college, most colleges will only accept transfer grades that are C or higher, because their programs, they're going to have a prerequisite for a lot of their programs that you need to have a 70 or higher in this particular course to be able to take that particular course. So, for instance, if you were going to engineering and you needed calculus 2, which most engineers would need, they're going to need that whole series, 3 or 4 degree level calculus courses, and you have a 62 in Calc 1 and you're trying to get into Calc 2, well, Calc 2 is going to say, hey, you need a 70 or higher, or basically a C or higher, to be able to take this course. So even at a D in most courses, you're still going to have to repeat that course to be able to get that C or higher. So that's why it's very important, really the first 8 weeks of any semester, to keep that grade as high as possible in the A or the B range. In case, the last sort of 7 weeks of the semester, something happens, you still have maybe a little bit of wiggle room that whatever you do won't necessarily bring you to a D or lower. You may not get the B, you may not get the A, but you would have a C. Now, I know not everybody likes C's, because that just, sort of means that you're average or whatever. Keep in mind with grades, though, in the end, yes, grades do matter, depending on if you're going to a prestige school or something of that nature. But really, in the end, what's going to matter with that is, what did you learn from the process? What did you learn from those 2 years, those 4 years? If you're going for a master's, it'll probably be 6 years. If you're going for a doctorate, it'll probably be 8+ years, depending on what you're getting your PhD in and how long it's going to take you. The end result is that piece of paper, right? That diploma that says that you have an associate's, a bachelor's, a master's, a doctorate in something. More than likely, whoever your employer is, obviously you're going to have to do the application, you're going to have to do the resume, the cover letter, the thank you letter, that type of stuff. But chances are, they're going to look at the school, they're going to look and say, okay, does this person have a master's? Do they have a doctorate? Do they have a bachelor's degree? They're not going to necessarily cherry pick what you made in Calculus 5, right? Oh, this person made an 89, but this person over here made a 92, and this person over here made a 64. We want the person that made the 92, obviously. They're not going to necessarily cherry pick the numerical grade, or they're not necessarily going to look at the letter grade so much, because, I mean, if you got the doctorate, you got the doctorate, no matter what your grades were or your GPA, so to speak. You must have did well enough to be able to walk across the stage, write your dissertation, defend your dissertation, and get that diploma or get that degree. So just keep that in mind. I know grades, as it relates to like scholarships and student loans, parents, other factors, financial aid, yes, they do matter. I mean, obviously, you probably wouldn't want a surgeon who went through his schooling or her schooling making C's and everything. even though, yes, he's passing, yes, they did get the degree, blah, 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 but still, I mean, would you really trust a doctor who made C's through those 10 or 15 years of schooling to become a doctor? Do you trust them to work on you or your kids or a family member? I mean, that's where sort of the quality of the grade and everything sort of comes into play. Um, so, as I said in the previous email, pretty much the rest of, basically week 6, I think, through weeks 10, the next 5 weeks is going to be our poetry unit. Some folks like poetry. Some folks don't like poetry. Some folks don't really have a opinion either way. They just say, well, that's what we got to do, so I'm going to have to sort of get through it. Poetry and music sort of go hand in hand. I know some of the music today is decent. Some of it is just pure trash. Some of the music of the 70s, 80s, and 90s is, sort of the same thing. It's decent, it's good, when some of that's just pure trash. Poetry is that way too. I mean, you're going to find good poems, you're going to find bad poems, you're going to find sort of mediocre poems. It's like the stories. With this particular class, we have a wide collection, a wide range to choose from. So that's why I try to choose something a little bit different each time that I'm teaching this class, so we're not doing the same thing and I'm getting too bored with it. So I hope each week, the series of poems that we read, I hope some of you do sort of appreciate how they are structured, how they're organized, how they're put together. Yes, it's going to be from some folks that are, obviously clearly dead now. Some of the language is going to be a little bit different than maybe what you're used to, especially in week 6 when we look at Wyatt and Queen Elizabeth I, and of course Chaucer. Some of y'all probably read Chaucer in high school. You probably dived in a little bit with his Canterbury Tales, but he actually, there's other things that Chaucer wrote that a lot of times at the high school level, and really sometimes at this, these freshman and sophomore level English courses, you just don't get a chance to really explore. So that's why I sort of picked this little poem, To Rosemounde, as our little way of getting introduced into really sort of that birthing place of when poetry started, as it relates to English. If you looked at sort of the pattern, that's why, with Guy de Maupassant, he was sort of considered the father of the short story. We look at Chaucer sort of as the father of English poetry as we know it. He definitely comes before Shakespeare. Their languages are worlds apart in a lot of ways, even though they both sort of were born and lived in London at different periods of time. By the time we get to Chaucer, we're not in Old English. A lot of folks like to get this whole deal with this shifting of the language really mixed up. They get it mixed up when we start looking at Shakespeare stuff too. Because they look at Shakespeare and they look at Chaucer and they say, well, they're both in Old English, I can't read them. Well, Old English is stuff like Beowulf. It's more Anglo-Saxon literature. I don't know if y'all read anything of Beowulf. I may throw some stuff up just for example purposes, not necessarily during this video, but throughout this section, because Old English, Middle English, and Modern English are 3 different things. A lot of what you see with Chaucer is coming from French. He was very highly influenced by French writers, the French language. Some things maybe a little bit with Latin and Greek. But he doesn't write in Old English. He writes in Middle English. There is a difference. Shakespeare, because some folks will say, well, If Chaucer writes in Middle English, then Shakespeare has to write in Middle English too, or Old English still. No, Shakespeare writes in what we would consider early modern literature. So Shakespeare coined a lot of words that we sort of still use today. But he's not Old English. He's not Middle English. He's early modern English. He's basically the earliest part of what we speak today, believe it or not. So what I'm going to do is sort of just read through, give my sort of take of the Middle English language here. And I'm pretty much going to end it with that. I'm not going to get too involved with the analysis just yet, because I know some of y'all haven't had a chance to clearly read anything from week 6, because you're trying to finalize everything that you need to do for week 5, which is fine. But I just thought maybe if you hear the language, and what I suggest too is sort of go through, see if you can read the Middle English on your own. You can listen to this. You could probably find other recordings possibly. But then if you're still having issues with understanding what's going on, because I think the actual piece I give you, it may gloss some words and it may not. See if you can find a modern translation of the poem. I will see if I can as well. I think there might be a couple out there. But that will sort of help you as it relates to studying for quiz 2, which is going to deal, quiz 2 deals with this first week of poetry in week 6, which is going to, cover this particular poem by Chaucer. You're going to have the Wyatt poem, which is a particular sonnet. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. And Queen Elizabeth I, one of her poems. So the quiz is going to be basically it's 10 questions, 10 points apiece. I believe like 3 questions come from each one of the poems, and there might be one extra that comes from a poem to get the 10. Most of the answers, I think there's going to be one where you're going to have to write maybe a sentence, maybe 2 at most, but most answers, I would say 9 of the 10 questions are going to just really involve 1 or 2 word answers. So keep that in mind. It's going to be like, in some ways, filling in the blanks for some. If you read the poem, if I'm going to try to have a online session next week. So go through these poems. The poems are really short. You can read them multiple times. Annotate the text. And what I mean by annotate the text, you should have been doing the last 5 weeks of the short stories, is you should print these stories out and write in the margins, right? Write your questions, highlight stuff that is interesting or puzzling, or maybe that you can take to a tutoring session and ask me, hey, what the hell is going on with this particular piece? I don't understand it. Or it's a good starting place to begin discussions when we meet for these weekly tutoring sessions. Because really the tutoring sessions, my vision for those were to basically offer them to both of my 1102 sections. And if you have questions on a particular reading or a particular item that we're doing for that week, or maybe in weeks gone by, because you did the reading and know sort of what's going on, we can have a little discussion with that. Lately, folks have been showing up, and there's not been a lot of, hey, I'm not really understanding this. I don't know what to do with this particular short story or this particular passage. I think they're showing up and thinking it's going to be more of a lecture. I can do more of a lecture in those tutoring sessions if I have, 1, a good group of people that can make it and show up, and 2, those same folks that do show up have read enough of the material up to that point that we can actually discuss. Because otherwise it's going to be one-sided. It's just going to be you sort of as the audience just laying back and listening and not really participating, which is never good, because then it's all on me, and you probably don't want to listen to me for 30 minutes or 50 minutes or 75 minutes. That's why I say if a group of English 1102 students can come in fully prepared, or at least read a good bit of the stuff that we can actually discuss one of the poems, like you would do in a face-to-face course, that would be beneficial, I think, in the long run, because everybody in these courses of mine, they have their own opinion, they have their own brain. I like to hear other people's opinions, and we can start that as sort of as a starting or a jumping point into a lecture or into a discussion over that particular piece. Otherwise, it's just like me speaking to the wall. Sort of what I'm kind of doing now in some ways, but I want to be reading this poem. But it just makes the whole participation. Everybody feels like they're part of the class. They provide some input, and everybody should get something out of it. You learn something from me, I probably will learn something from you, and in the end, the session will be a success. It just won't be one-sided on me lecturing the whole time. Obviously, the first thing what I like to try to do is address any kind of problems or solution you may be having with any type of assignment or work or whatever the case may be. But from there, because basically I have the session from about an hour, so a good 20-30 minutes could be devoted to stuff that you really need to address or need help on, and the other 30 minutes could be a brief discussion on something that, it can't be very long and detailed, but we could still have a discussion nonetheless. All right, so enough of me rambling here about that. Let me get to the actual poem, and we will call it a day. And like I said, I want to wish everybody good luck on the exam, and let me know if you need anything. Let's see. I'm probably going to try to share a version of this, so bear with me while I do that. Okay. So you can kind of see the words at the same time here. Let me go back here and share this screen. So you should see the poem here, To the Rosemounde. So let's sort of begin here. Madame, ye burn the Abbe au Landes. Hold on. Let me do it this way. Something is going wrong with this thing. All right, let's start over with this. Madame, ye burn of all Arbote Sharon, as fair as succor is day Mapamonde. For as the crystal glorious ye shine, and like ruby then your cheeks are round. There within ye be so merry and so jocund, that at every veil one that I see your dance, it is an ornament unto my wonder, though ye to me need do no dancing. For though I weep of tears, full of time, yet may they will my heart not confront. Your seems vows that you so small of time maketh my thought and joy and bless han bande. So curiosity I go with love bound, that to myself I say in my penitence, suffice me to love you, Rosemounde, though ye to me need do no dance, not never pick what worthy in Gondande, as I in love am what we and wond, for which fool upte I of myself divine, that I am twine trustum the second. My love may not refrende nor fonde, ad brinde in I amoris a pleasance. Do what you lust, thy wealth your thought be found, though you to me need do no downs. So as you can tell, that is quite a mouthful, but that's how Chaucer would be read during his time in the early 1300s. He was basically born around 1340 in London, and he actually would depart this world on the 25th of October, 1400. So that's sort of the world that we're living in with Chaucer in the reading here. So I hope you have fun with the 3 readings this week. The language will get more modern as we get closer to the end. So I don't think that we're going to be reading a lot of this Middle English stuff. Pretty much this week is probably that whole period. We may look at a little bit of Shakespeare. Of course, that's more modern English, of course, early modern English. But after Chaucer and Wyatt and Queen Elizabeth, the language gets a little bit easier to pronounce and easier to say. I hope you have a good weekend, and I look forward to answering any questions or comments or concerns or whatever the case you may have in email. And I will see everybody, I hope, next week.